peace like a river attendeth my way. When sorrows like sea billows roll, oh, whatever my life thou hast taught me to say, it is well with my soul.
There's a lot of heaviness this weekend for our faith family, and it forced me and reminded me of several things. We're going to be in the Psalms for the next 4 weeks, fittingly so. We need these words today from the Lord. But when you come to church, you just don't come for yourself. You don't. When I come not just to minister, but to be ministered to as well. You guys have heard me say it several times. I'm not the only person who preaches a sermon every Sunday. If you're a follower of Jesus, you preach a sermon. Your life communicates something every single week. And we have no idea, most of the time, we have no idea what the people in the chair next to us are experiencing on a personal level. And it's important for us when we come to church to come ready to get something from God, but also to be ready to give something too. It could be as simple as some kind words or praying with someone. But I was just reminded of that this week, that we really, really need each other desperately. We're going to start in John 16 this morning, in the words of Christ, before we get to Psalm 40. Jesus said this. He said, "These things have I spoken unto you, that in me ye might have peace. In the world ye shall have tribulation." Tribulation means trouble. Not just like you're in trouble principal's office, but I mean you're in a deep, deep mess. In this life you'll have tribulation, but be of good cheer. I have overcome the world. Some incredible promises there. One, he promises us, as long as we are here and we are breathing air and we are on this earth, we are going to have hardship. That is a fact of life. But he says, I've overcome all of it. The man who wrote Psalm 40, ultimately God wrote it, but the man who penned it, David, was a man the Bible says at one point was after God's own heart. And that he was a very godly man. But at the same time, he also found himself in some deep, deep, deep messes. Some he created himself. And if I'm honest with you this morning, a lot of the messes that take place in the life of your pastor, I am at fault. Start off with blaming the person you look at in the mirror. That David had that issue. A lot of the times he was in a mess. He is the one who created it. But he was also in messes where he didn't create it. He was a victim of maybe other things taking place in his life, other people's sin. And so really, if you are facing hardship today, you are in good company. If you look at the Bible, the people that were following God diligently faced extreme hardship. I think of Peter, the man who denied Christ. Can you imagine being in that situation where Jesus says, "Pete, you're going to deny me 3 times. Of course, Peter says, "No, I'm not. I would die for you." Okay, Peter. And then if you remember when Peter denies Christ 3 times, and then he figures out Christ was right, it says he went out and he wept bitterly. He felt like the scum of the earth. How could I do that? I think of Elijah, who had done incredible works for God, but at one point gets so depressed that he asked God just to let him die. This is a great man of God. He finds himself in a pit. We all know of Job. If you've never read the whole book of Job, let me challenge you to do that this week, because Job has a massive struggle. I mean, if you read chapter 1 and just read chapter 40, you're not giving Job much thought. Sometimes it's presented like, well, Job was just okay with how everything turned out. No, read Job. He struggles. I mean, he's like, why? Why me? Hey, God, you're all powerful. Why me? It is a real struggle for Job. And he was in a mess that he did not create. It says he was a perfect and upright man. Think of John the Baptist. Jesus said he was the greatest man to ever walk the face of the earth. And near the end of his life, he sends a messenger to Christ to ask if Jesus really was the Messiah. Jesus, are you really who you claim to be? He just gets to a point where he's not even sure of himself anymore. And that's what you get in Psalm 40. You get emotion, you get struggle, you get triumph, you get so much wrapped up into this psalm alone. So what we're going to do is we're going to read this psalm, and then we're going to just get some truth from it that we desperately need. Psalm 40. I waited patiently for the Lord, and he inclined unto me and heard my cry. He brought me up also out of a horrible pit, out of the miry clay, and set my feet upon a rock, and established my goings. And he hath put a new song in my mouth, even praise unto our God. Many shall see it and fear, and shall trust in the Lord. Blessed is the man that makes the Lord his trust, and respects not the proud, nor such as turn aside to lies. Many, O Lord my God, are thy wonderful works which thou hast done, and thy thoughts which are to usward. They cannot be reckoned up in order unto thee. If I would declare and speak of them, they are more than can be numbered. Sacrifice and offering thou didst not desire. Mine ears thou hast opened. Burnt offering and sin offering thou hast not required. Then said I, Lo, I come. In the volume of the book it is written of me, I delight to do thy will, O my God. Yea, thy law is within my heart. I have preached righteousness in the great congregation. Lo, I have not refrained my lips, O Lord, thou knowest. Lord, you know. I have not hid thy righteousness within my heart. I have declared thy faithfulness and thy salvation. I have not concealed thy loving kindness and thy truth from the great congregation. Withhold not thy tender mercies from me, O Lord. But let thy loving kindness and thy truth continually preserve me. For innumerable evils have compassed me about. Mine iniquities have taken hold upon me, so that I am not able to look up. They are more than the hairs of my head. Therefore my heart fails me. Be pleased, O Lord, to deliver me. O Lord, make haste to help me. Let them be ashamed and confounded together that seek after my soul to destroy it. Let them be driven backward and put to shame that wish me evil. Let them be desolate for a reward of their shame that say unto me, Aha, aha. Let all those that seek thee rejoice and be glad in thee. Let such as love thy salvation say continually, The Lord be magnified. But I am poor and needy. Yet the Lord thinks on me. Thou art my help and my deliverer. Make no tarrying, O my God. You can just see and feel the emotion with which David is writing this song. He's been in a pit. He calls it a horrible pit. He calls it a miry clay. He calls it basically the worst possible situation you could find yourself in. So before I can move on to different issues we may be having or we have created, let me first address those. If you're in this room right now and you're not a follower of Jesus, I have to address that first, because the pit he's talking about is a situation where you find yourself completely and utterly helpless. There's nothing you can do. And the worst situation a person can find themselves in is that they're not a follower of Jesus Christ. This is the worst situation anyone can be. I could talk about financial struggles, marriage struggles. I could talk about problems with your kids. We could talk about those things, and those are real issues we're going to address. But the worst possible problem a person has is an eternal one, an eternity without Christ. And so before I want to mention any of this other stuff, if you have not seriously considered who Jesus is, you need to do so. As we talked about last week was Easter, and basically laid out that Jesus is everything he claimed to be. He is God in the flesh. That is true, and it has great implications for your life. You need to consider who Jesus is and what that means for your eternity. My admonition to you would be, follow him. Do what he says. Give your life to Christ. But life itself is not without difficulty. You know, some would preach a gospel and have preached a gospel that sounds a lot like this. Give your life to Christ and all your problems get solved. I've heard preachers say that. The only problem with it is it's not in the Bible. It's not biblical. Because I'm a follower of Jesus and all my problems haven't been solved. In fact, there have been some pretty crappy times in my life. Can we attest to that, church? See, salvation fixes our eternal problem. The problems we are now going to face as believers, we face them with Jesus Christ. We don't face them alone. So what's a pit look like for us? Well, it can be poor health. You know, sometimes we cause that, but other times it comes out of nowhere. It can be our health. It could be losing your job unexpectedly. It can be marriage issues, financial stress, rebellious children, loss of a loved one, or the consequences of your actions, reaping what you have sown. You might be the reason you're in the position you're in right now. Look at verse 12. Look at what David's saying. Innumerable evils have compassed me about. There are problems I didn't create that are all over me. And then he goes on, he says, my iniquities have taken hold upon me. My sin has caught up with me. And he says, I can't even look up. I'm beaten down. There's so much going on, I can't even see the sky. I like what Charles Spurgeon, a great preacher of the 1800s, said. He said, it's amazing what a ray of light will do. Suddenly the sun shines into a room and the whole air seems full of innumerable specks of dust dancing up and down the sunbeam. You guys know what I'm talking about. You think you've cleaned your house and the sun shines in and you got all these little things. When I was a little kid, I thought they were like, I don't know what I thought they were. I didn't think they were dust. They were just kind of cool to see, right? Moving all around. And here we are breathing in tons of dust. That's great, isn't it? So if you start coughing, I know why. Someone's coughing. See? There we go. He says the light doesn't make the room full of dust. It only shows you what was always there, but which you did not see until the sun shone in. And if a beam of God's true light were to shine into some of your hearts, you would think very differently of yourselves from what you have ever done. I question whether anyone among us could bear to see himself as God sees him. Spurgeon says if God's light were to shine in your life, you would see things about yourself you don't want to see. And he goes so far to say, I don't think any of us could really look at ourselves in that light as God sees us. And the thing is, God sees all the sin that we have, and yet he still loves us. That's what blows my mind. I was telling the early service, if I had treated you the way I have treated God at times in my life, you would never speak to me. Yet he loves me, and he loves you. He knows what you've done, and he still loves us. I like how David phrases it. He says in verse 17, I'm poor and needy, yet the Lord thinks on me. I am the lowest of lows, yet God, you think on me. Why? It's like he couldn't fully grasp that, and I don't think that I can either. So maybe you're in a pit and you're the one who created the mess. Or maybe you're in a pit and you're affected by things that are outside of your control. It is the worst possible feeling to be helpless, when there is nothing that you can do to make a situation better. If you haven't found yourself there, you might in the future. I hope you don't, but most likely you will. When I was about 7 or 8, my brothers were in the early service, but I grew up on a farm. If you don't know, where I grew up, but we had a little farm, some cows and some horses and stuff. And where cows and horses come in at the barn, it gets very, very mucky. I think really, really bad. Muddy, deep. Our neighbors, Don and Kay Studemeyer, they had a dog that had puppies. And of course, 7, 8-year-old, we want to see the new puppies. It's really cool. And my brothers, being much smarter than I, they decided to cut across the field through the dry area. I was in the barn. It was about 45 degrees that day, and it had rained probably not a couple days earlier, and it was just a mess. And I'm like, I'm taking a shortcut. I'm going to go through the muck. It's exactly what I did. And I got stuck really, really bad. And so here I am, a 7 and 8-year-old, and it's like 45 degrees, and I'm freezing. And I can't move, and I'm screaming for help. My brothers, they say they didn't hear me, but seriously, I mean, I wasn't that far away. So I'm like bound and determined, I'm going to get out of this muck. And I pull my leg up as hard as I can. My shoe stays there, and now my bare feet are now in the muck. And no joke, I'm there for like 10 minutes. I'm thinking, this is like Survivor, man. I'm going to die, or something's got to take place. I've got to get out of this. And the more I struggled, the worse it got, until finally my brothers were done playing with the puppies. And I don't know what happened to Luke and Brian. They just kind of left me. But Matt came to my rescue and pulled me out. I couldn't do anything. I went inside the house and got in the bathtub and turned the warm water on because I was just freezing to death. But the more I struggled, the worse it got. And when you find yourself in a helpless situation, often the more you struggle and try to fix the problem on your own, the worse it gets. It just gets worse. It's a horrible pit. It's a miry clay. So what do? How do you get out of a mess that either you created or inadvertently you are in because of someone else's actions? What do you do at a time like that? And David gives us an answer, and you're not going to like it. Because when I read it, I didn't like his answer. I wanted something different. But notice what he says. Psalm 40, verse 1. I waited patiently for the Lord. Seriously, Dave? You don't have any... You waited patiently for God. So that's exactly what I did. In fact, you see that a ton in the Bible. Let me read a couple other instances. Psalm 27:4 says, wait on the Lord, be of good courage, and he will strengthen your heart. Wait, I say, on the Lord. Psalm 37, rest in the Lord and wait patiently for him. Fret not thyself because of him who prospers in his way, because of a man who brings wicked devices to pass. Proverbs 20:22, say not thou, I will recompense evil, but wait on the Lord, and he will save you. I don't like the wait. Anybody else in here like the wait? Okay. But I want to tell you, it's not like a doctor's office kind of waiting. When I think of waiting, I think of a doctor's office, and I'll just be the first to tell you, I hate doctor's offices. Anybody else hate doctor's offices in here? Yeah, thank you. Thank you. As a man, I hate them probably more than the average mom, I guess I could say. And I'll give you a couple reasons. I mean, one is a mutual, we don't like doctor's offices because you go there and they make you wait longer and longer and longer than you should, right? You have an appointment for a reason, right? Your kid's sick, probably throwing up on you. It's like 10:30 is 10:30, right? Let's get in there. But it gets worse for us guys. And guys, I know you can relate to this. Doctors' offices are sexist. They are. For example, they have a big screen, right? In most doctors' offices, they have a flat screen, kind of like we have on the back. And you know what? It's showing infomercials about nasal spray. Who cares, right? I'm in there, I'm waiting. At least throw some Sports Center on there, right? Give me something I can watch. But it gets worse. They have these magazines. They'll have Good Housekeeping. They'll have Parenting or whatever those things are titled. And men, we don't read those. I mean, I try to be a good parent, but I don't read parenting magazines. I don't need to know different techniques for breastfeeding, right? I don't need to know that kind of stuff. I would like an ESPN the magazine or a Sports Illustrated, but here we are in the waiting room, and there's nothing for a guy to do, but thank God for smartphones. Amen? At least have something that we can play. But the kind of waiting that David is describing is not the kind of waiting we would think of. We often think of waiting as we're sitting and doing absolutely nothing, just trying to bide our time. But if you're going to catch anything, I need you to catch this before we move on, is that waiting on the Lord is active. It's not passive. it's active, not passive, all right? If you can catch anything, you got to catch that. It's not just sitting and twiddling your thumbs and being like, okay, maybe God will figure out that I need his help. No, it's active. I'm going to give you some ways this morning that waiting on God is active and show you how that is. The first thing we see with David that I want to pull out to you is that he cries out for help. I mean, plain and simple. Look at verse 13. Be pleased, O Lord, to deliver me. O Lord, make haste to help me. God, please help me and help me quickly. He said, I'm poor and needy, yet the Lord thinks on me. Thou art my help and my deliverer. God, I need you. It's one thing you can do. Cry out for help. He wants us to. Because what it shows on our part, it shows humility. That one, we're not saying we can do this on our own. And secondly, it shows reliance. It shows, God, I am relying on you, which leads me to my second point. We notice that David cried out to God for help, but that he also trusted in God exclusively. Look at verse 4. Blessed is the man that makes the Lord his trust, and respects not the proud, nor such as turn aside to lies. He says, I am trusting completely in you, God, to help me. I'm not trusting in anything else. Can God use other people in our lives? Absolutely. But my trust ultimately is in the Lord. And so he says, I'm not going to pay attention to anything anyone else is saying. I mean, think about Job's friends. They were a big help. They basically came and said, Job, you must have sinned a lot because your life stinks. Were they right? No. Trust exclusively in the Lord. Next, you reflect on the blessings of the past. Look at verse 5. Many, O Lord my God, are thy wonderful works which thou hast done. And thy thoughts which are to usward, they cannot be reckoned up in order unto thee. If I would declare and speak of them, they are more than can be numbered. He says, God, you've done incredible things in my life. So you find yourself in a pit, you find yourself in miry clay, you need to reflect upon what God has already done in your life. If you've been a follower of Jesus for any amount of time, you have faced some highs and you have faced some lows. And Christ has been with you the entire time. David, no doubt, was probably thinking about the time when he was a teenager, no older than these guys. And he was going against an impossible odd. Going against Goliath. He's probably the size of Joe. Joe, stand up. I just embarrassed Joe in front of everyone, but I love you, man. There's David for you right there. Goliath probably looks more like Brad Guzman in the back. Brad, stand up. Brad's a big, strong guy. It's Joe versus Brad, right? Go, Joe. My money's on Joe. Good luck, buddy. You guys can be seated. They're never coming back to church now. I just ruined it. But no doubt, David in his low times was probably thinking, God, you've done impossible things before, and I believe you can do it again. Maybe it sounded like, God, I've really messed this up. I need your help. Or God, there are a lot of people who are trying to hurt me, trying to mess things up, and I need your help. And I trust you. I know you can do it. Because you've done it before. Next, we need to obey him. So we need to cry for help. We need to trust exclusively in the Lord. We need to reflect. And then we need to do what he says. Look at verse 6. Sacrifice and offering thou didst not desire. Mine ears hast thou opened, burnt offering and sin offering hast thou not required. He's reflecting upon the mistakes that King Saul, the king before him, made. King Saul gave sacrifices to God, but God didn't have his heart. And Samuel called him out. He said to Saul, he said, behold, to obey is better than sacrifice. He says, basically, Saul, all you've been doing the entire time is playing church. You think God is impressed because you show up to church or you do these different things, or the equivalent in the Old Testament. You bring sacrifices to him, but you could care less about him. And so he tells him, he says, stop. Just stop. The children of Israel, God gets to a point with them where he says, I don't want your sacrifices anymore. I want you. I want your heart. I don't want you to play church. I don't want you to just put on some fake facade. I want you to follow me. Then you can sacrifice. But I need your heart. I need you. I need you to obey me. I need you to listen to what I say. And essentially what David is saying is, you need to obey God even when things have fallen apart around you. To obey God, even if he doesn't deliver you out of your pit immediately, you might be there for a while. And he says, you serve God no matter what. Which kind of ties in with the next point, that you need to seek God. He says in verse 16, let all those that seek thee rejoice and be glad in thee. That I am to pursue God in my relationship with him in the good and in the bad. And you know, a lot of times we seek God really hard when things are bad, and I can kind of understand that to a point. But David's point is, you need to seek him just as hard when things are going good. Do not treat God like a spare tire. Do not treat him that way. He's more than that. Seek him continually. I know I've had to ask God forgiveness for that. Where I become more intense in things when things are bad. I need to be intense, period, in my relationship with him, in my pursuit of him. So you need to cry out for help. You need to trust in him exclusively. You need to reflect on what he's done. You need to listen to what he says, and you need to seek him. And when he gets you out of the pit, you need to praise him for it. Look at what David says. He says in verse 3, and he put a new song in my mouth, even praise unto our God. Many shall see it and fear and shall trust in the Lord. Verse 9, I have preached righteousness in the great congregation. Lo, I have not refrained my lips, O Lord, thou knowest. God, you know. I have not hid thy righteousness within my heart. I have declared thy faithfulness and thy great salvation. I have not concealed thy loving kindness and thy truth from the great congregation. He says, God, I've told everybody what you did for me. I didn't get out of the pit on my own. It was because of you. You're the one who changed everything. Without you, I have absolutely nothing. And he says, I didn't hold back when talking about that, when letting people know about that. And probably one of the biggest issues we have in Christianity is that we are simply silent when it comes to the things of God. Yes, it can be demonstrated in your life, but ultimately the gospel is communicated with our lips. Out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. We have to say something. I like verse 16. He says, the Lord be magnified. The Lord be magnified. You know what that means? I shared this with the early service, obviously, but I'm a bit of a nerd, just a little bit, right? Brandon's going, I'm a bit of a nerd. I really love learning about stuff in space, and it's just fascinating to me. It's something so huge and so immense, and there's a lot to be gained from there. And when I was a youth pastor, I would often tell my teens, if you need evidence for God, just go on a starry night and look up. I mean, it's there. How did all this happen by some cosmic accident? How do all these things come together by one giant accident? It's impossible. It's mind-boggling. But David ultimately said God gets magnified when he pulls us out of a pit. That we're essentially telescopes. I was at Mom and Dad's last night, and they live in the country, as you know, and you can really see the stars really well out there. At our house, not so much. We live in town in Withensville, and you can see some of them, but not a lot. And you look up, and you just see these tiny specks, just these tiny things, and yet we know they're not so tiny. Let me give you a quick example. Brad, bring that up. Behold. Oh, that was good timing, man. Whoa. So there we go. We have our Earth. We have Pluto. Kids, that's not a planet anymore. Didn't know if you knew that. Kind of a bummer, but nonetheless. It's an old, I got it off Google Images, and Pluto was still a planet apparently on Google Images. But You can see the scale. Our Earth is small. Our sun is huge. We all know that. We can see it right now. The sun's shining right in. But if you go to the next slide, we learn our sun is actually pretty small. And there are actually suns or stars that are even bigger than that. Some that could fill our entire solar system. They're absolutely massive. But if we look at them at night, they just look like little tiny specks. How do we know they're so large? It's because we have a telescope that helps us see their scale. It helps us measure those things accurately. And we know that those tiny little dots are much greater than anything we could ever try to comprehend. And essentially, David is saying, your life is like that. When God pulls you out of a pit, you are to let everybody know He's not just some small, insignificant God, that He is the only true God, that He can change their life because He changed yours. That He's big, that He's strong, that He's powerful, and that He loves them in spite of all the dust in their lives. So are you in a pit? Are you there because, you can put it down, Brad. Are you there because it's your fault or someone else's fault? Or maybe it's nobody's fault. Cry out. Trust in the only one that can help you. Look back on things He's done. Listen to Him. Do what He says. Seek Him. And when you get out of the pit, tell everyone how it happened. Would you bow with me this morning?
It is well with my soul. With my soul. It is well with my soul. It is well with my soul. With my soul. It is well with my soul. It is well with my soul. With my soul. It is well with my soul.